Before I can share all the positives and initiatives Nike has done for sustainability and corporate social responsibility, I have to touch on the bad and who they were to make them who they are today. So, back in the early 90s, in 1991, activist Jeff Ballinger released a statement that essentially documented that Nike was violating working conditions, fair working conditions, child labor laws, and had low pay wage for their employees. When this was released, Nike apparently took a hands-off approach and simply just released their code of conduct and thought that that would get them off the hook. However, many consumers and stakeholders took grave concern in this, and for 2 years, protest persisted. There was a protest at the Barcelona Olympics in response to Nike. A lot of athletes were very against wearing that brand because of all the negative feedback that was released in the media. And it wasn't until 1996 that Nike actually took initiative. So it was almost 5 years later and 2 years after the major protest that they decided to create a department to monitor and control these conditions. However, the public is still outraged at this point. They're upset that nothing's really being done to change the current conditions. Indonesia workers were only receiving 14 cents an hour, which is obviously way below minimum wage, even for the year 1993. So they continue to persist and continue with certain hands-off regulations. And it wasn't until Andrew Young came onto the scene in 1997, and he put a detailed report out there about labor conditions and addressed the issue. Now, I would say this address was 50-50. It was very well received by consumers and people in the public. However, some claimed that it was a little too soft and not enough hard evidence to produce that they were actually trying to create change. But then in 1998, CEO Phil Knight gives a speech explaining how he is utterly disappointed that when thinking of his brand, it automatically gets perceived as sweatshops, low-waged employees, child labor law violations. So he decided that he was going to make a claim and a change to make Nike a household brand again. And so then he was going to raise minimum wage standards. He was going to increase monitoring and adopt the US OSHA clean air standards. And then within a year from that, Nike created the Fair Labor Association, which was in coordination with their HR as well as human rights. And this was to establish independent monitoring and essentially a larger code of conduct. And then within the next couple of years, in the early 2000s, over 600 audits were completed and being able to monitor working conditions. And then by 2005, Nike became the first in the industry to publish a complete list of their factories and the conditions that they were in. So they were the first company to really set themselves apart and show their transparency. And then finally, after that, they were able to write a detailed list, 108-page report of their working conditions and pay statements for all of their employees. So though it took several years to finally get them in the right place, it was in the early 2000s that these initiatives started to kick off and make Nike a household name in the athletic industry again.